You can get Sons of Patriarchy completely ad-free on Apple Podcasts for $4.99 per month or $44.99 per year. This applies to our entire back catalog and every upcoming episode completely ad-free. Listening without interruption. If you don't mind the ads, you can still listen to the series for free on any of your favorite podcast platforms. This revenue helps support Outreach Idaho and helps pay the bills of the series. Now, on to the episode. Quick announcement before we start this episode. We've launched our website and initial line of merch. Go to sonsofpatriarchy.com and pick up a t-shirt, a sticker, or a crew neck fleece, or all three. And wait till you see our design. We went bold. A link to the website is in our show notes, or simply type sonsofpatriarchy.com into your search bar. Now, on with today's conversation. All right, we are in season 2, and depending on where we place this in season 2, people will hear this either before or later, or earlier or later. This is not going to make it into the recording. This is just for me to remind myself of where we're at in the season. So we got a fun one. We're going to make this fun on the Wilson women and a lot of the theology that they teach, whether explicitly or implicitly, and across a broader corpus than I've ever read in the Wilson, because I've actually never read Wilson or any of the Wilson daughters or Wilson women. But we have somebody on who has read the Wilson daughters and Wilson women, and uh, more broad than I have. So if you can introduce yourself and how you found yourself reading the filth that comes out of the Wilson pen.
Well, I am Jessica Jenkins. I am the creator behind We Who Thirst. My ministry focuses on historical context of the Bible and specifically women of the Bible. So I deal a lot with women's issues, women who've been in abusive situations, trauma, neurodivergence, that whole field. So those sorts of things and my ministry background has really made me interested in the teachings out there that impact the women today. And so I had heard of Rebekah Merkle's Eve in Exile book. I've heard about it for years. I've been generally aware of the Wilsons and they are bad news. We don't want this. But I keep seeing different people on social media you have to read this book. It's so good. And my heart would just sink every time. My sister's pastor is even recommending it from the pulpit. And so last summer I was like, I have to address this on my little tiny platform. So I did an in-depth book review of Eve in Exile last year, going through chapter by chapter, giving chapter by chapter reviews. And my goal in that, even though I have knowledge of the Wilsons and that whole mess, I was like, I'm going to approach this book as though I walked into my Christian bookstore, saw it on the shelf, picked it up, and I'm just going to take it for what the text is doing. And then I started into the text. I was like, oh my goodness, this is horrible on so many levels. There's so much danger. There's so much toxicity. I can see why some people really like it, but there's so much subtle things going on around the edges that it's incredibly dangerous, I believe, to the soul of the image bearers reading it.
Yep, agreed. Even though I haven't read, I've probably listened and watched to more Wilson stuff than I think anybody on this planet, which I do not recommend. But I've never read, so I will
Yeah.
keep that on the front end. But I've watched, so I mean, thousands of hours, because I want to think their thoughts after them in some
Yeah.
strange way.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can label it out, if you can list it out, or if it's just general topics that you research. What have you read and researched as it relates to the Moscow woman, articles, books, talks, lectures, whatever it is? So just a general sense of what Jessica has ingested of this.
Definitely Even Exile by Rebekah Merkle. Years ago, I read Fit to Burst by Rachel. That was years ago. I briefly skimmed a little bit of it in preparation, and I've read a bunch of their articles, mostly from Desiring God. They have a ton of articles on the Desiring God website, so I
Huh.
printed off a whole slew of those to see what are they putting out there to other platforms? How are they presenting themselves to the world out there? So I didn't count, but probably 15 or so articles from there. I read over transcript from Rebekah Merkle. She was on somebody's podcast, and so I read over transcripts and just trying to get an idea of how do they present their ideas, how do they present their thoughts, both when they're on somebody else's platform, and then how do they do it when it's canon press. I can say whatever I want because
Hmm.
it's daddy's printing press, and here we go. So kind of getting a feel for how they present themselves across the spectrum.
Got it. What's the time frame, would you guess, from like the oldest thing that you've written from them to the earliest or the newest thing that you've written from or that you've read from? It doesn't have to be exact dates, but like
Yeah,
15 years old to current or 20 years old to current or 10 years
it's
old to current.
probably all more current. I don't know when Fit to Burst was written. I read it when I was nursing my daughter, who's now 7. So that one's at least 7 years old. Even Exile is from 2016. Some of these articles I think were from 2013. A lot of them. Some are from as early as 2020.
Okay.
If I'm just looking at the dates here. So it's more the last decade or so that I've been reading. So not going back historically. I haven't read Nancy Wilson's books. I've focused more on the daughters because they're the ones writing prolifically now.
Yeah.
Nancy, I think her books are older, so I haven't read hers, but I've been focusing more on what like the women my age are commonly consuming.
Gotcha. And even before I get to some of these questions, how in your circles and circles that you're aware of, especially so within Christian circles, maybe even more pointedly in conservative or
Mm-hmm.
traditionalist Christian circles, how um, how pervasive or how influential would you guess the Wilsons are, even if not named, but maybe in the background of some of the stuff that you've been around too?
Um, I would say they're pretty influential. I mean, my sister's pastor was recommending it from the pulpit. The women I interact with daily online in my ministry, I was getting DMs about their churches using this book for Bible studies. And the Wilsons' ideas, especially because they were platformed by Desiring God and they used to be platformed by the Gospel Coalition, their ideas have just gotten out there and they've made a tremendous cultural impact. And when I was looking up podcasts by the sisters, Rebekah and Rachel, even some mission organizations have brought them onto their podcasts to talk about womanhood, which will have global impacts because those mission organizations will take those thoughts for their missionaries, which will then disseminate them out, as well as Canton Press and Moscow's purposeful global reach as well. So they have a profound influence all over evangelicalism. The circles I personally run in, like my local church and the people I'm weekly rubbing shoulders with, there might be one or two people in our church who have been like, "Oh, I listened to Nancy's podcast. It's so great." And everybody else is like, "Don't do that." So my personal church, it doesn't have much influence, but it is profoundly out there in a lot of areas.
Okay. So with that background, what have you found in your reading, listening, and research? You're like, okay, these are, I mean, I don't know if it's three, five, whatever it is, but like these things, they just keep pounding on. They just keep hitting on. And it seems that it's everywhere. And whatever they write, whatever they talk about, they always come back to this, or they always come back to these things. So what are those dominant themes that when you read a Wilson or a Merkle related to Wilson, you know you're going to come across this.
Yes, and the names that we're dealing with here, I want to answer that question, but I just want to be clear for any of our listeners
Yeah.
because when you're dealing with daughters, they don't have the same last name as their parents.
No.
So I'll refer to them as the Wilson women, but we're dealing with Nancy Wilson, who's Doug Wilson's wife, Rebekah Merkle, who is their daughter, and then Rachel, and I'm going to slaughter her last name, and I
Jankovic.
apologize,
Yep.
but Yakovic.
Jankovic.
Jankovic.
Yep.
Yes. So we have Nancy Wilson, mom, and then the two daughters, Rebekah Merkle and Rachel Jankovic.
Yep.
And so these are the women we are interacting with their thoughts.
Yep. And Rebecca's husband is Ben Merkle, who's the president of New St. Andrews, and then also an elder at Christ Church. And then Rachel's husband, Luke Jankovic, is an elder also at Christ Church. So it's they keep it in the family and all at the same church in the same
Yes.
school. Yep.
Yes. So, because I just got a DM from somebody when I was mentioning that I was reading this book, and they're like, "Oh, Rebekah Merkle is the Doug Wilson's daughter." I had no idea because a lot of people don't know
True.
that Rebekah and Rachel are related to Doug and Nancy because they don't have the same last name. So
Yep.
I want to clarify that.
Good.
But themes that come up, I would say there are implicit and explicit themes. There's what they talk about, the explicit themes, and then there's the implicit themes, which will, I think, really have to be discussed, but we'll get there. The explicit themes, they talk a lot about womanhood. They talk about the role of homemaker, wife, mom. Nancy wrote an article on burnout, so she's trying to branch into some of the emotional health of these women. They talk about abortion. Feminism comes up all the time. But most everything comes back to your role and duty as a woman. That's the big thing they are focusing on. Even Exile is written explicitly to answer the question, what did God make real women for? So that kind of centers what most of their writing is on, that what did God make women for and how should they go about doing that?
Okay. Um, what what pulls people into some of these like how do they even get introduced to some of these writings even in the first place? Because it's a publisher in Moscow, and I know Desiring God is massive, but I'm not aware of anything maybe past the mid 20 teens of them having been published. And their podcast rather large. I know their Facebook presence is on the
Mm-hmm.
larger side too.
I
Um,
know Desiring God was publishing an article as recently as 2020.
okay,
They were still publishing the Wilsons, or 2022, excuse me. There may
that-
be ones.
that's a
I
lot
was just
sooner. That's
taking
a
a
lot more
smattering,
recent
so
than
I
I
have
thought.
that article on my desk.
Yep,
But
that's a lot more
within the
recent
last
than I
two
thought.
years,
Yep.
but I think a lot of it is word of mouth. Women overall, they're thirsty for books that help them understand womanhood, help them understand God's desire for women, especially women who are homeschooling moms or stay-at-home moms. They really want to know, how do I do this? They want meaning for their work. They often go to ladies' Bible studies. And so somebody has been influenced by this book. They recommend it. It gets used to Lady Bible study. Now you have 20 women who are being influenced by this book. So women's communities of women who are just seeking to know God, seeking to know how to be good wives, moms, homemakers, they get introduced either from social media. Influencer they follow might be like, you have to read this book. It's so good. Somebody at their church, an older woman, might recommend it. It might be in a Bible study. And so it can get out there very broadly once you get a few key people signing off on it, like Desiring God or TGC or some of those places.
Okay. Um, Another sort of clarifying question, but also pressing a little bit deeper. Um, the topics that the Wilson, like Nancy Wilson, Rachel Jankovic, and Rebekah Merkle, the topics that they discuss, it's not like they're not discussed if those three aren't writing on them. Because
Right.
as far as I'm aware, it's and I don't read a ton of like female specific books. I read a lot of books by females, but not female specific books. But there's a lot of books out there on feminism, however, whatever somebody believes or thinks about that, and abortion and roles in the house, both historically and then like in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of people who write on this.
Yes.
Why have their books kind of captured the conservative Christian imagination?
I don't know for sure. I have guesses. That's
Yeah.
all I have. But I
Yep.
think some of it is some of the implicit things that they do in these books that other people don't, which are actually some of my biggest concerns about these particular books. These books are full of an us versus them attitude. You have the us, which is those who believe as the Wilsons do, and then you have them, which is the feminists. It's the culture. And so their books and articles are written to create an us versus them divide. And the language is specifically crafted to keep the people on the us group, the in group, in, and keep the other people out. And so if you find yourself already starting to think in an us versus them attitude and that feels comfortable to you, their style of writing could really resonate. Especially if you're already of the mindset that feminism bad, culture bad, and you find a common enemy with the Wilsons. And so you will like the fact that the Wilsons are deriding those that you disagree with.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot of people enjoy that, like that, or are comfortable with that. I read one article. It was a book review of Eve in Exile. It was by Andy Naselli,
Yep.
who is a pastor at Bethlehem, and
And a big time
he's
Wilson
a
fan too. Yeah.
yes, the systematic theology professor at Bethlehem College and Seminary. He wrote an article of a book review of Eve in Exile, and he had lots of things to say about how wonderful it was. But what really struck me was how much he liked the way Rebekah Merkle talks about other people.
Hmm.
He described her attitude and the way she talks to other people as witty, colorful, and wholesome entertainment. And then he gave quotes. I would describe the way she talks about other people as straw man, caricaturization,
Hmm.
belittling, nastiness, and she does not speak about other image bearers kindly, but there's a large swath of Christians who, if this book review is any indication, believe that speaking poorly about those with whom you disagree and belittling them is acceptable. And Merkle can write in kind of a funny way, especially when she's belittling those she disagrees with. And so if you fall into that, you might really find it a fun read because she's going after those that you already want to go after.
Hmm. Hmm. So again, going even further into that, and discussing these themes. So why these themes? Like the feminization of the church, or femininity, or feminism, or abortion. And I think as Christians, it's like that's some of the stuff that a lot of conservative Christians really hit on, which is why I asked earlier. It's like, why do they hit on it if it's already being hit on in a lot of these circles? So why do they just keep hammering home these things if it's like, okay, we get it. Like this is what you think about this stuff. Move on, or do something, or say something else that's maybe more helpful or more accurate.
I think they keep, hopefully this will answer your question. I think they keep coming back to this. As I've been thinking about some of the Wilsons' theological and methodological structure, is they are dominionists. They are Christian nationalists. They have this hierarchical view of the world that they believe God has orchestrated hierarchy, and Christians should have a certain place in that hierarchy in the government, etc. And that's beyond my scope. I know you've had episodes talking about all that.
Hmm.
But when it comes to women, they have to help women understand where they fit in the Christian nationalist dominionist worldview. And so they are going to write exclusively for women, saying in this broad scope dominionist Christian nationalist worldview, here is how you fit. Here is what God has called you to do. And since we are, in their words, right on a dominionist hierarchical view of society, we are better equipped to teach you how to be a woman than wimpy complementarians who just aren't strong enough to really believe in patriarchy. We are the ones who can actually help you do this well because we have, from the top down, the hierarchical structure, and we're trying to help you figure out how to pigeonhole yourself into that structure. And so it's a lot of writing fit to help women find their place in a Christian nationalist dominionist structure without directly telling you that's what they're doing. They give you hints, but they don't like spell that out on the front of the book.
Yep.
But that's what they're doing.
So two questions that spawn off that. I'm very glad that you went in this direction. I figured this is where you're gonna go. One question that's on the tip of my tongue, or like the first thing that I want to ask, and we've we've been asked, I couldn't tell you how many times by women who are writing to us or emailing us or DMing us or commenting on one of our posts who are confused
Mm-hmm.
that Rebecca, Rachel, and Nancy will say women's place is in the home with
Mm-hmm.
kids,
Mm-hmm.
educating their kids, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't really have a function in society, although I don't think they would say it quite that clear. Um, but then they're they've got a function in society. They have a voice to women. They have a voice to men. They're going to conferences. They're allowed to write. They're allowed to be theologically educated, even though
Yep.
I think they might say, yes, women could be theologically educated in order to train up children in the admonition of the Lord. So we've always wondered, and I've made the case that you need a spokeswoman to tell other women what women are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do, and it can only
Yep.
come from a woman.
Yep.
I'm curious for your perspective. Like, why are they allowed to speak and have this influence when they've been on record to say women are more deceivable than men, women are less logical than men, women are less educated than men, men are the only ones who should be leading the church in the home and teach, but then we can still teach because reasons.
I laugh because I have the same question. It doesn't completely logically follow through. And I wonder if that is partly because of what I've often seen in complementarian circles.
Hmm.
And I would say they're more patriarchal than just
Sure,
complementarian.
sure. Yep,
But in complementarian circles, as a woman with a very high degree of theological education,
yep,
I typically walk into a church with more theological education than the pastor or entire pastoral staff combined.
yep.
So I've walked this world. And I was trained in complementarian schools, the whole nine yards. But in complementarian circles, there's this nobody says it out loud. It's completely just written on the walls, but you don't really read it and you don't talk about it. There's this idea of exceptional women. And an exceptional woman is allowed to do things the normal women don't get to do.
Okay. What makes
Nobody
them
talks about,
exceptional? Why
I'm
them versus
sorry,
somebody? What makes them exceptional? Why them versus another woman? Is it like they just so happen to get educated even though they're not supposed to be educated to the degree that they're educated?
perhaps in some circles, like for me as a woman with high education, that automatically kind of puts me in a little bit more of the exceptional category. A
Yeah.
lot of times it's who they're married to, unfortunately. If you have a voice because you have a voice in the church because you're sleeping with the right man.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Just I like it. Straight shooting. That's exactly what happens. You're
In
sleeping with
these
the pastor.
cultures,
Yeah. You're not sleeping as if you're like you're adultery necessarily, but
right.
it's you married the right dude. You're
Yeah.
sleeping with the right dude.
In these complement types of complementarian cultures, a woman cannot have an official voice in the church unless she lands one of the few positions they have, like secretary or women's ministry director or something like that, which they have very few actual jobs available to
Yeah.
women. And the Wilsons don't even like jobs for women. But in these circles, unless you find the man who's willing to bed and wedge you
Yeah.
in the reverse order, you don't get a voice in the church. You just don't. There's no place for that. And so, this idea of an exceptional woman who's connected to the right people, she has the right connections, the right background and education, which is interesting because as I look over, like I have dug up and down trying to find Rebekah Merkle's actual credentials.
Yeah, I
Like,
know
what is her
she has a
actual
degree from New St. Andrews
right?
previous to its accreditation. So technically, she has no official education, and I don't even think her Logos education was accredited. So neither her nor Rachel have any official education beyond that which their father set up for them.
Exactly. And so, but they're connected to the bigwig.
Yeah.
My dad was a pastor, and he's a lovely, humble, gentle, amazing man. But being a pastor's daughter with education and a strong personality, I definitely felt that, oh, I'm the exception. I get to do things other women don't do because I'm connected, because I'm smart, and because I'm bold. And so I think that's why they get to do what they tell women aren't really supposed to do because they are the exception to the rule. And
Hmm.
so they've walked into it with they're an exceptional woman, they're the exception to the rule. They're going to teach you the rule while they are able to circumnavigate that same rule for
Yep.
themselves.
Which is, if you think about it, if you are not sleeping with the right man who has the right amount of power and but you still have the same education, you still have the same boldness, you still have the same background, and yet you don't have I'm married to this man, and he has a voice, therefore I have like then you're considered like boisterous, you're considered
Yep,
a feminist, you're considered it's like you said, not it's almost
exactly.
like not like it's almost not even coming from the right background. It's if you're not attached to the right dude,
Yep,
then you even if you have the same personality, this even to some respect the same theology, the same education, um, if you don't have the line, then you can't
you have to
not
be
you can't
attached to the
speak
man
to
in
us.
power.
Yeah, then you are considered the problem because boisterous women, although you could very well make the case that Rebecca, Rachel, and Nancy are those boisterous women, the feminists that they
Mm-hmm.
themselves decry if they were not of the Wilson line.
Yep, yep.
So, and then another question that's based off of that is these critiques that they have of supposed cultural ills. Um, how well do they do at describing these cultural ills? Because they do the same thing everybody else does. But I mean, objectively, not like, yes, of course, we're going to disagree with almost everything they say because it's them who's saying it, which we do have to be objective and say, okay, this is
Yes,
your argument, this is your evidence, this is what you're
yeah.
saying. How do they do when it comes to writing against these ills, writing against feminism, writing against abortion, writing against the LGBTQ plus agenda, writing against all this stuff. How do they do?
Not well. I can walk through it a little bit. Trying to think where to start here. When we talk, a lot of it, they really do a ton of caric- caricaturization. They do a ton of that. It's almost a straw man argument, which they're supposed to be educated in classical education with the Logos school of rhetoric and logic and all of that. And then I'm finding straw men constantly. I'm like, that's just
Yeah.
I don't know a single feminist that would
No.
agree with your description of
No,
feminism.
we actually have we've been sent some syllabi from Logos and New St. Andrews. And you're like, this is what they teach them at a classical school. That's supposedly some incredible education.
Yeah, and so going through, they do what I see a lot of Christians do, and so it's not just them. Because if I read the Gospel Coalition or Desiring God, a lot of these big places do very similar things. They say the cult. One thing I was even polling my followers today because I was reviewing the articles for this interview, and they're constantly talking about how the culture despises stay-at-home moms. Stay-at-home moms are just despised and hated. So I got on my social media on Instagram and I put it in my stories. I'm like, okay, I have 3 hours, so I need to get as many answers as I can in 3 hours. How many of you have actually experienced being despised because you're a stay-at-home mom in real life?
Mhm.
70% were like, maybe like once in a great while, but not really. 20 something percent's like, yeah, I've experienced that. But So they're not even they're not factually honest. They've made up a boogeyman that they want to scare people. Stay-at-home moms are despised, so you need to fight. You need to push into God's calling because the world hates you. It's that us versus them rhetoric. When it comes to feminism, in Even Exile, she has 3 or 4 chapters on feminism, and I haven't personally researched feminism in depth, like the
Mhm.
history of it. But as I took notes and as I looked through, when she was dealing with the proto-feminists, she assassinated their character. She showed how they were immoral women sleeping around, but she never once actually interacted with their ideas or philosophies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's character assassination. That's not
That is.
scholarship.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, my preparation for this season and slash this conversation, I've been reading the first wave feminists, so
Mm-hmm.
Simone de Beauvoir and a lot of those. And after reading, I was like, they don't believe any of the stuff that they're being told that they believe. Most of them are scientists and describing the female body because most males didn't know about the female body. Most male
Still don't.
doctors didn't know about the female body, and so they had to be told about it. And then that's described as feminist, and it's like, I mean, I'm learning a ton of stuff,
Oh yeah.
like anatomically,
Yeah.
biologically.
Yeah.
It's you actually read them for yourself, and then you realize like they've never read them.
Yeah.
They've read other people who have read them,
Yeah.
whom they themselves have read them poorly, and so set up these people because they don't like feminism, ergo those whom are supposedly feminists in some way, shape, or form, um, must be wrong in whatever they say.
Right. And they want to create a narrative of what feminism is.
Yeah.
In Even Exile, Rebekah Merkle works really hard to create a narrative of what feminism is. And her narrative that she is working really hard to weave is that feminism is about free sex, optional motherhood, and self-fulfillment, doing whatever you want, and it's tearing down society. She's not considering any of the reasons why women wanted the right to vote, why they wanted a prohibition, why they were concerned about unlimited pregnancies and what it did to them and their families,
Yeah.
why they wanted to be able to work. She doesn't go into any of that. It's just free sex, self-fulfillment, bad, 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 evil feminists tearing down society. Women are bad. Beware, run away.
Yep. And it's ironic because she wouldn't be able to do what she does in writing had it not been for the first and second wave feminists. Is like, hey, we want to write, we want to be educated, we want to vote. You don't get a Rebekah Merkle or Rachel Jankovic or Nancy Wilson in the writing ministry had it not been for the feminists who are like, hey, these are the things that we want. That wouldn't exist for them.
One of the most interesting things, I laughed so hard when I read this in her book. On page 40 of Even Exile, Merkle is talking about how women, they want to play the game and pretend they're successful. So she says men can critique feminism purely on philosophical grounds, but women have to prove that they're not just a stay-at-home mom. She says, and I'm reading, no one listens to you unless you have proven yourself in the business world. So you have to trot out your employment history and assure everyone that you're not one of those, heaven forbid, domestic women. Then, having established credibility, you may proceed to critique feminism. And then she goes on to critique feminism throughout her book. So then I flip to the bio on the back of the book, and this is her literal bio after she says you're not supposed to trot out your employment history. Her bio says, Rebekah Merkle has dabbled in a number of occupations ranging from running her own clothing label to designing fabrics to becoming a full-time high school humanities teacher. Her designs have been featured in a number of magazines. She has edited Brit Lit curriculum, etc. And I'm like, you just did the exact thing you were saying was bad to do.
Yep.
And so they don't hold the line. And I felt like her treatment of feminism was very poor. I felt like she didn't actually deal with any of the underlying questions that the feminists were actually wrestling with. In one of her chapters, she goes so far as to say that the feminism is failing women because 20% of women used some sort of medication for their mental health in the 1960s, and that's up to 26% of women in 2016. So therefore, feminism is failing. But she didn't, because women aren't any happier than they were back then. And she knows this because more people are using depression medication, not taking into account any of the other cultural, societal reasons that there could be a 4% increase in 50 years. So what Rebekah Merkle does is use this stat to try to prove a point without considering any of the other surrounding variables. And she does this continually with her description of feminism. She does it when talking about abortion. Whenever they talk about abortion, they constantly talk about kind of a privileged white woman's potential reason, imagined reasons for getting an abortion. She'll lose her scholarship. She won't be able to get the highfalutin CEO job. They always talk about a privileged white woman's perspective on why they imagine a white woman might get abortion. They never talk about the poor, those with food scarcity, those who don't feel like they can take care of a children, someone in a dangerous situation. They never consider anything other than a privileged white woman's perspective. And so you see this very narrow thinking, this lack of nuance, that there's so many reasons for feminism. There's so many horrible reasons that women feel like abortion is their only option that they never consider. But they just paint this flat picture as though they are the experts and you have to believe them. But they don't actually dive deeply into any of these cultural issues. They just make a scenario and then defeat their imaginary scenario without really listening to the people who are hurting and asking for solutions to their real life problems.
Mm-hmm. So with all of this, if their arguments are poor, if they write us versus them, um, if they don't understand what it is that they're arguing against or setting up, what makes them so popular? Well, if this is the case, and this might be a very, I asked this sort of knowing the answer, but I'd love for you to describe, um, if they don't know what they're doing, why do so many people like them?
They're very confident. If you've ever been swayed by somebody who very confidently tells you that they know exactly what they're doing, you're like, oh, then they must know what they're doing. That's the way they portray themselves. We know exactly what you're doing. And they talk about things like feminism. Most people haven't studied feminism, so they're like, oh, Rebekah Merkle talks very confidently. She must know what she's talking about. Though if you actually look at any of their work, they don't cite squat.
Hmm.
They really I compare, and this is like a lay level book. So I pulled several books for similar audiences off my shelf, and Rebekah Merkle's had by far the fewest footnotes and notes references. She just doesn't cite much. She has a few in there, I will give her credit, but by and large, I'm like, where's your citation? Where's your citation? Citation, citation, citation.
Yep.
But she's confident. She has confidence in spades. So there's that. Another thing I really noticed in reading their stuff is they use subtle abuse tactics to keep people in line. They constantly downplay emotions. I was reading one of Nancy's article, and she's talking about being burnt out, and she says, if and I'm paraphrasing, but when your first step, if you're feeling burnt out, is to repent. And you might need to repent if you are feeling discouraged or disillusioned or disappointed. And I'm reading it, I'm like, these aren't sins. You're allowed to feel discouraged, disillusioned, and
Hmm.
disappointed. This isn't sin, but they flatten emotions so that you're sinning if you feel anything but obedient duty or joy. And so they try to keep women from feeling. And then they also use so much language throughout their work. I'm trying to find the exact quote. I think it was from, sorry. I'm trying to find the exact quote. I think it was from Rachel. I'm not finding it. That's okay. But they use a lot of language, and Rebekah does it all the way through even exile, that this text is obvious. It clearly says. They never actually talk about the biblical languages.
Hmm.
I went to school for 10 years to learn biblical languages. They never talk about them.
Hmm.
They don't do any scholarship. They just say, the text obviously says, and if you disagree with this, you're an idiot. They don't say it that clearly, but that's basically what they're doing.
They're starting to say that stuff. Yeah, they may not have before, but yeah, they're starting to say, yeah, if you don't think this, or they'll say like you're a feminist, or you're
Mm-hmm.
a woke liberal, or whatever it is that you're obviously not a biblical literalist if you don't read it the same way I do. And I'm like, yeah, in some ways I'm not a biblical literalist because I take biblical genre into consideration and biblical languages into consideration.
And
Um,
historical context, which is
yeah,
what
and
I do.
historical
How do we
context.
understand the women's passages in historical context? Yes, but they use a lot of fear tactics, especially on, I mean, you have to consider their audience. Their audience is young moms who are sleep deprived, overworked because the entire household duty is on them.
Yep.
They don't have help. They don't have community except for the ladies' Bible study that's introducing them to this book, which
Yep.
so they have mom brain. They're exhausted. They are grasping for straws. And then the Wilson women, Rebekah Merkle comes in exuding confidence, with kind of a mean girl attitude that you either disagree with me or you're an idiot, or worse, and I can't find the article that does this. I apologize, I don't have the direct quote. But or worse, they say, if you question our philosophy, you are like the serpent and Eve in the garden. Like they
Yep.
said, you can't question whether women can be pastors. You can't question whether a woman's place is in the home, because that's just giving into the temptation of the devil. Having the question and doing your own study, does the Bible really say this? What they're saying is giving into the devil. So it cuts the legs out from under these women who are exhausted and burdened and just hoping for some hope and some help. And they're told, don't even ask the questions or you're in sin. Don't feel discouraged or you're in sin. And it creates this bondage for these women that they don't dare question, because us versus them, if I step out of the in group, I'll lose the little bit of community I have. I'll lose the little bit of hope that I have. I'll lose the little bit of help that I have. And so they create this toxic, abusive situation around their writings to keep women in a specific status quo, so that the women don't question, they don't think, and they'll just take their expert, air quotes, advice at face value.
Hmm. I'll get into your background and your ministry in a moment. But now that you've brought up the biblical context, historical context, biblical languages, I'm relatively certain Doug doesn't know Hebrew. I know he has some Greek, and it would not shock me if neither of his daughters know any languages. Um, and
And they
I'm
mock scholars,
yeah, and I'm
flat
positive
out
Nancy
mock
doesn't.
scholars.
Yeah. So from your education, from your training, and from how you teach others to understand and apply the Bible, with all the tools that you have and with all the tools that you give others, um, is there like some quick examples, or maybe just in general their use of the scriptural text where they say, "Hey, it's obvious as this," and then you're like, well, it's not quite as obvious as you describe it when you really look at the text and where it lands within the canonical context and how the languages are used here and who is being spoken to and who is speaking. So what does that look like? Because we've talked about them describing supposed cultural ills, but like you
Mm-hmm.
said, they'll use biblical topics or biblical verses or biblical stories to back up their claims when the way they're using it is improper for the context. So what does that look like on the ground for the Wilson woman?
Well, I don't even have to go into biblical languages or context. I have an example right here in front of me. Some of their use of scripture is so poor that any person with an English Bible who compares what they say to their English Bible would be like, wait, that's not right. Like, that is how bad this is. You don't even, if you have bandwidth, because I want to be compassionate to the women reading this who are like,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't realize my baby was up 5 times last night. I can barely read.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when my children were little and I was up literally 5 times a night. Like, I have 10 years of Bible and theology education, and I would read my Bible and be like, I have no idea what that just said.
Yeah.
Like, no clue. And so I want to have compassion for those readers of this because they are in the hardest part of their life right now. And so this isn't a statement on them,
Yep.
but this is just how poorly they handle scripture. So I'll read a quote from page 101 of Eve in Exile. Rebekah says, when God first created Adam, he gave him a task. Not only that, it was a bigger task than any other human had been given. The first man was given a wild and empty planet. He was told to subdue it, Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28 says, God gave the task to the man and woman together. If you literally read the verse that she put in parentheses at the end of her quote, it contradicts what she literally just said. You don't even have to know Hebrew to see how bad this is.
Yep. Yep. My favorite, and we did this all throughout season one, and one in particular, second in rank, that's episode 14, was, and this is again, it's the irony of ironies. They will harp on, they make a big deal, and I talked about this earlier, about the deception of women by the serpent, more specifically because they read Paul.
Yep.
It's I go, so if people want to hear my take on this, you can go to episode 14, which I won't get into. Um, but it's when they're writing to other women about the deception of women, you have to look at them even outside of the way that they understand Paul in that context or what he's describing. You have to ask them, well, then why are you teaching if
Exactly.
if women are more deceived? Why are you writing this down for other women who are deceived by a woman who's teaching them, who's likely deceived according to her own theology? Isn't this a circle of deception? And how, like, I've always wondered how did how do they A, take this for what they think it is and teach it to other women when the thing that they're trying to take tells them not to teach other women?
Because they're exceptional.
Yeah, which is that's
And because they're just parroting their father.
true, true.
Most of this book, most of Even Exile is not footnoted because I'm pretty sure it's just Doug Wilson repackaged and we put a female name
That's
on it.
right. Yeah, we call it Doug Wilson with a wig.
Yep. Another passage that is commonly misinterpreted, but you asked about if we look at language and context. In the article Harvest of Homemaking by Rachel Jankovic, she says, scripture is the basis for my commitment to being a homemaker. She mentions Titus 2, and then she says, Proverbs 31 describes a glorious picture of the woman who is clothed in strength and dignity. She gives herself to the needs of her household.
Yeah.
And so she says, Proverbs 31 and Titus 2 teach you to be homemakers. Well, if you
That's
look
not
at
Proverbs 31.
it's not Proverbs 30. I just did an entire, on my We Who Thirst podcast, I just did an entire very long series on Proverbs 31. How do we understand Proverbs 31 in its historical context? And what is the Hebrew language and poetry communicating about how God delights in women? And the main thing that complementarians say, and the Wilsons say a woman needs to do, which is making food and taking care of children and doing housework. Those three things are like the hallmark of homemaking in most complementarian circles. Those things the Proverbs 31 woman never does. You never see her parent. She outsources all of her food making. And she doesn't clean anything the entire passage. And there's so much more in. You can listen to my podcast on that. But that is one area where they miss it because they have a preconceived notion. And Titus 2 is the same. They say Titus 2 teaches you to be a homemaker, except our modern idea of a homemaker where the husband goes away to provide and the wife stays home to to take everything he offers and make it beautiful. That's how they talk about
Mhm.
it. A woman enfleshes the husband's vision. Um, that whole idea is completely foreign to Titus. That societal role did not exist in the
No,
New Testament.
no.
It didn't exist till the last century, yet they hold it up as God's will. They have no
Yeah.
clue what the Greek words mean. They have no clue how it all works together. And but then they stand with absolute certainty that this is what the Bible says, but they're wrong. And they don't understand how the cultures worked. The fact that the man is the provider, the breadwinner, and the woman is the homemaker. In the ancient culture, everybody was the provider. Old,
You
young,
had to
male,
be. Yeah, you were
female.
agrarian.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everybody did the provision. And so that dichotomy that we have now didn't even exist in Titus 2. So they just, again, it's a caricaturization of what they think it means, but when you look at the Hebrew, the Greek, the historical context, that's not what it's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite things, and this is only thing I'll peek, but I will drive people, we'll link to your podcast and everything else in this episode. And then also episode 14 from season one. My favorite thing from Proverbs 31, and you would know this since you know Hebrew. I was trained in Hebrew and Greek to the end of my life, and it was insanity. But I'm also very thankful for it, so I can look at this stuff and help people out, which
Yeah.
is a large driver of this as well. But the Chayil Isha is the valiant woman in
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs 31, and I'll give our listeners like 5 seconds. There's one other woman described as the Chayil Isha in the entire Hebrew Bible. I'll give people 5 seconds to figure out who I'm talking about, but I bet Jessica knows who I'm talking about.
Yep.
All right, your time's over. It's Ruth. You have
Yes.
one person in the entire Hebrew Bible, and if you look at Ruth's role in the book of Ruth, and this is especially so like Ruth 1 through 3, um, you don't get no homemaker with
Nope.
Ruth. You get the I need she doesn't say like I need a man because I need somebody to fulfill me. It's like I need to continue my line.
Mm-hmm.
I need to continue the Messiah's line. Um she's worried about continuing this not because yeah, like I said, she needs a man, but she's also going to the threshing floor. She's going and searching out. She's helping her. I forget the relation to her with Naomi, but
Mother-in-law.
yeah, mother-in-law. I knew his mother. I wasn't. It was not. It's not her mother. It's her mother-in-law. But you you get somebody, and she then like she personifies in some way Proverbs 31. Somebody who is a go-getter, somebody who goes out into the
Mm-hmm.
city gate, somebody who makes her own way, and then
Mm-hmm.
she just tells Boaz like, "Hey, this is what's happening, and you're my redeemer,
Yep.
and
Yep.
we're gonna make this work." And then, what was it 3 generations after her comes David. It's you don't get the submissive, diminutive,
Mm-mm.
which not to say that a woman who wants to be that is
Oh no.
wrong, but
No.
you don't get the submissive, diminutive woman as like this is what the Bible upholds. And one of my longer term projects is you don't get that anywhere in the Hebrew
Mm-mm.
Bible for any woman
No.
ever.
No. No.
And it's like, then where do they get, and nowhere in the New Testament. It's like, where do they get the submissive woman? Because it's not
Mm-mm.
there in the Old and New
Mm-mm.
Testaments. It just isn't.
The amount of a matriarchal authority a woman had. I have a whole lecture on this on YouTube. You can look that up. But the amount of matriarchal authority a matriarch had in the household in the Old Testament was just incredible,
Hmm.
to the point where the Egyptians, and this is an entire Semitic culture, so
Yep.
we're talking Egypt through Palestine, all of that. The Egyptians even talk about how if the patriarch wanted seconds at dinner and the matriarch said, no, that's all the food for today, he's out of luck. She's just like, no, no more food. And he has to put up with that. And that's just the way it is. And everybody knows this. The matriarchal authority in the Old Testament is massive.
Yep.
And so that view of womanhood really changes fundamentally how you view these passages. And the Proverbs 31 woman, even the Eshet Chayil, that phrase is an overtly masculine phrase. One of the things the Wilson women harp on over and over and over again is that you have to be feminine. You have to be feminine. You have to be feminine. You have to do things in a woman's way, blah, 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 blah. And over, it's one of the main themes of their books. You have to be a woman and do things in a woman's way, which to them means being a homemaker
Yeah.
and being a submissive. But if we go back to Proverbs 31, that again they try to use as a basis for that, and that we've been talking about, Proverbs 31, when you look at the Hebrew, uses overtly masculine language to describe the Proverbs 31 the entire way through. I just wrote an article on it for CBE International. You can find that. But I outline how Proverbs 31 uses inherently masculine verbiage to talk about the Proverbs 31 woman.
Yep.
And it's baked into the text that God likes this. God likes the strong, vibrant, warrior-esque women. This God delights in. And that's very counter to how the Wilson women talk about womanhood, because they are very gender roles. You have to have men and you have to have women, and they have to be super distinct. No one is arguing that men and women are the same, even though the Wilsons say feminists believe men and women are the same. They don't.
Yeah.
No one is arguing men and women are the same, but the Wilson and complementarian obsession with having to have this hard dichotomy between what makes a man and what makes a woman, Scripture doesn't hold that line.
No. And in almost every instance you can possibly find in Scripture, it actually contradicts. And this is something I was thinking about recently. You actually have it in Scripture where men are passive far more often than women are, and women are like, "Hey, man, you're doing this wrong, and this is what we have to do right,
Exactly.
and we're gonna make sure we get this stuff done." And sometimes the men are just dragged behind them and say, "Hey, like let's figure this stuff out," which is not to like the Bible is not man bashing, nor is it female bashing.
Right. It's
It
showing
is
the human condition.
it does, and it's all. I mean, I've tried to make this point myself. I've asked people have talked about the voting rights of women in the Old Testament. It's like you're not going to find it in the Old Testament. You'll find it in surrounding cultures, and you'll also find it in Greco-Roman society, but that's more towards the New Testament society. And it's true that Greco-Roman society did not look at females in a particularly good way because of Aristotle and Plato and the uh,
Yep.
the Homeric tradition, which did not like
Yep.
women.
Nope.
Um,
They're
and
intensely misogynistic.
yep, yeah, very intensely misogynistic. And the Bible goes out of its way to make sure that women are the first ones at the tomb, that women are the ones who spread the message, almost as like a big fat middle finger to the rest of society and said, women have the imago Dei as much as men do and have the agency as much as men do. And they're going to be the ones who go to the open tomb and say, hey guys, Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah, there's so much more that we
Yeah.
can go
Oh,
into
absolutely. We
this.
could talk about that all day.
Yeah. But we will link to some of your resources in this as well. And you've touched on this, and I think the black, white, good, bad, us, them dichotomy is huge. And the tiredness of many of the women that they talk to or that they write to. Is that what women are so enamored, at least the readers of Wilson, Jankovic, and Merkle, is that what they're enamored with or influenced by, or is there something else, or is it like they've kind of created their own crowd, they've conditioned their own crowd, and now
I think
they can't
I
do
think
anything
the
but read them.
I think the weariness makes people susceptible.
Okay.
I think it makes them easy targets. Which I remember very much the weariness of the early years. That's when I read Fit to Burst by Rachel. When I told my husband, I was like, oh, I was nursing our daughter when I read this. He's like, maybe that's why we didn't see eye to eye on parenting. I was like,
Yeah, that's probably
yeah,
why. Yep. Yep.
yeah. And so it's easy you're just looking for hope. I think what draws women is they're looking for hope. They want to know that there is meaning in the middle of the night feedings, in changing the 50th diaper of the day, in scrubbing the floors once again. They want to know that the day in, day out tasks that they are doing matter. And what the Wilson women do well is tell them that the day in, day out tasks of mothering have meaning and are important to God.
Yeah, they're
The
kingdom
Wilson women
building.
are they're spot on with that, and we need more people talking about
Very
that.
true.
That
Very true.
it's so God cares about the middle of the night feedings and mopping the floor for the 15th time and catching vomit in your hands when your kid came to tell you where they were sick and couldn't make it back to the bathroom. God cares about this, and our hard work matters, and He has a place for us. The Wilson women talk about that, and I think many women find it very invigorating. They're like, oh, somebody who's telling me that the drudgery of my life is meaningful. And they're thirsty for that. They want that. They want to see the bigger picture for the mundane of their lives. And the Wilson women offer that to them, along with a huge
Hmm.
backpack of toxicity that's going to end up killing them. But they, on the front end, they offer hope. They offer meaning. They offer empowerment in their domestic duties. They offer them a reason to invest in their domestic duties. And women are thirsty for that, and for good reason. They need that, but they could get that. Like Felicia Masonheimer just wrote a book on the home and homemaking. They could read her instead of Rebecca Wilson. There are people talking about that, and I think sometimes they seek out the Wilson women, and sometimes it's just what's handed to them, as we've talked about. But they do. It's insidious because you'll have 5 pages where it's really good, and they sneak stuff in that if you're not sharp and on the ball, you miss it. And it's just subtle, and it creates this weight that ties women down that they didn't ask for. They didn't come to the book looking for that. They didn't come looking for the us versus them attitude or the snark or the meanness that they're going to absorb. They come looking for hope.
Hmm.
And the Wilson women are good at saying God loves women who stay at home. And so if you're feeling discouraged,
Hmm.
that is an important role in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
They say that very eloquently. And I think women want to hear that, and they need to hear that. They just
Mhm.
need to hear it from somebody who's not going to give them a backpack full of toxic, abusive mentalities alongside that message.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, last sort of random question before the official last question. Um, they talk about all these practicalities, like you said, which is good because there's a hunger for it. Um, for lack of a better way of asking it, they're like, is there theological depth? Like, hey, this is I'm gonna teach you some rigorous stuff to get your mind going, or is it, hey, here's a lot. I mean, good, like you said, good practical stuff that women are thinking about more so than the men are thinking about for a variety of reasons. Um, but is there like a theological punch that goes behind this? Like, hey, we're gonna really stretch you while we also give you all this practical advice that makes you feel like you're worth something. Or is there have you seen a little bit of a either lack of depth or surfacey, or women aren't made for this rigorous theological thinking? What have you seen in your reading on the more specific, like let's get into soteriology, or let's get into the doctrine of the Spirit, or let's get into theology proper, anything that's more I guess considered dense.
Dense. They definitely do believe women should be educated. They are very clear saying that. Merkel in Even Exile even talks about rubbing shoulders with people who didn't think women should be educated and how she disagrees with that.
Hmm.
So they do very much think women need education
Hmm.
so that they can do their roles well. They are pro education for women. I have not seen what I consider a lot of depth. Um, they try. They're going to really convict and challenge your attitudes. They're going to convict and challenge how hard you're working. They're very doing oriented more than being oriented.
Yeah.
I have not seen the Wilson women, talk about any of those headier, denser theological topics, soteriology, eschatology, all of those things. Partly that may be where they start referring to a man to learn. They very much stay in personal devo, emotions, womanhood. They want women to be obsessed with homemaking and domestic pursuits. They say you need an education, but they're not going to teach you the denser theological things. I think they would
Hmm.
offload you to a man at that point. They are going to talk to you about the importance of being obsessed with domestic pursuits. And that needs to be your primary and only focus. And you need to be creative and you need to be excited and you need to, figure out how to be the best homemaker you can be because all of your education and passion and desires, God wants to use that in your home, which sounds great to somebody who wants to be a homemaker, but for a woman who's like, but I want to be a speech therapist, or I want to be an OBGYN, or God has called me to do this instead, it's gonna really create a lot of guilt and internal angst. And so I'm seeing them focus very much on what they deem as a woman's world, which is the home, emotions, that sort of thing. I think as far as I've read, and I could be wrong because I haven't read every single thing that they've written,
Yep.
they leave the heavier, deeper theological concepts to the men to teach the women.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah, we've heard it before said, and this we made a big point. I think this was um, the reformed is not enough, and it's only a matter of rank. I think those are the two episodes we talked about this. They term it theology through your fingertips. It's if the theology is just kind of the dense stuff, it doesn't make any sense, which I would agree with. But it's they say men filter theology different than women do, and so therefore our teachings have to be based off that filtering. So if women are homemakers, then that theology has to be filtered through towards homemaking. And if
Yep.
men are kingdom builders, then that theology has to be filtered through kingdom building. And if we give
Yep.
men homemaking theology, then that's not the right fingertips. If we give women
Right.
the kingdom building theology, then what are they going to do with it? Because they're not kingdom builders. We're giving them
Right.
stuff that's not applicable to them,
Yep.
which is the stuff I've seen that they've
Yeah.
used theology
Yeah.
through your fingertips.
They're very much trying to, well, I think trying to might not be fully fair. The way they write isolates women.
Yeah.
They are putting women, and Merkle says it continually in her book, a woman needs to be at her battle station in her home.
Yeah.
They are, in effect, which is an abuse tactic,
Hmm.
whether or not they mean to do it, they are, in effect, isolating women away from other women, away from their secular community, away from support structures, to have them in their home with their husband, with their children, mom home alone with kids most of the time, and saying that is God's will for your life, that you would be home alone with your children. That is God's will for your life. He designed you that way. When the course of human history, women have only in the last 100 so years have women been home alone with their children.
Yeah.
But they are baptizing that as God's will. When women need community, they need other women's voices, but they're sowing seeds of distrust against other women's voices. Women who use their voices in their writings are whiny, disrespectful, demanding. You're to be quiet, you're to be submissive, you're to be at home with your kids, unless you're one of the Wilson women who can podcast, teach, and do all of the things
Yeah.
because they're exceptional. And your theology has to be tailored to your home. And you really just need to get excited, ladies, about cooking and embroidery and crocheting and reupholstering your furniture because you're supposed to be the best homemaker you can possibly be. So go paint some walls and do that and be really excited about it. That is what God designed you for. The end
Yep.
of the podcast, I was reading the transcript for with Rebekah Merkle. She ended it talking about kitchen linens. And she has a kitchen linen business. And yeah, ladies, we can go reconsider our kitchen linens. And I'm like, your writings are getting women to be more caught up with their kitchen linens than with Jesus
Hmm.
and his work and the needs of their neighbor across the street.
Hmm.
You are telling me I need to be more obsessed with the pattern on my cloth napkins than the neighbor down the road.
Yep. Yep.
Than my community's needs. But that's how they are taking their theology and handing it to women. And it's dangerous.
Yep. Yep. We have a clip. Again, um, this is in second in rank and then another one before that on marketing. where Rachel Jankovic, and it might be sarcastic, I'm sure there's some sarcasm in it, but she says, "Why are women taking so many notes in their Bible when they should be taking notes in their cookbook?" It's it's maddening, but it's also like it's the irony of she's a teacher
Yeah.
telling other women to spend more time at home when that's not what she's doing when she's writing these books, when she's supposedly researching or whatever the heck that it is that she does, or
Ugh.
leading these Bible studies. She's telling women to do the thing that she's not doing herself.
Yeah. And I find the theology that God biologically designed women to be fascinated with dish towels and wallpaper and laundry schedules to be demeaning towards women.
Yeah.
Yes, our homemaking is valuable.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And
I've
there are
been a
some women who
stay-at-home
love
mom
that.
most
There are
of
some
my
men who
life,
love that.
my adult life.
Yeah.
But to say that it just, it's not okay.
All right, so ending on a good note, and then somebody who has done on research on a lot of this stuff and is devoted your ministry to helping others read the Bible contextually,
hmm
with with an eye towards historical context, the languages, and then also I saw some stuff on biblically faithful characters and in ethnicity and skin
Yes.
tone and everything else. So talk talk about and I know you're not trying to set yourself as like I'm the opposite of the Wilson people, but I think there's a good model for what
hmm
might it look like to try to do this faithfully. So if you can talk through your ministry, some of the resources that you have, and what that helps people to do. That's
Yeah.
not just strict homemaking. Say, hey, no, woman, we can do all this stuff the same way that
Yeah.
guys do.
Awesome. Well, I have a podcast, the We Who Thirst podcast, where we look at women of the Bible in their historical context. So I talked about matriarchal authority. How does understanding matriarchal authority or this, that, or the other piece of historical context impact how we view the relationship between Sarah and Hagar or the Proverbs 31 woman? So we take historical context and we look at women of the Bible with the Hebrew, the Greek, the historical context to really see what's going on there without our modern day assumptions as much as possible.
Mhm.
So that's what I do in my podcast. And because historical context is so important to me, I've also worked to create visuals. I pour through museum websites to find historical artifacts, archaeological artifacts, and then I create designs of people of the Bible. In historically accurate clothing. Most
Mhm.
of our picture books, if you look at any children's storybook Bible, Moses and Jesus are basically wearing the same clothes the entire way through. We're
Yeah.
dealing with 4,000 years of history. They all look identical. That's not history. And so I'm working, I consult. I consult with authors, pastors, illustrators. People come to me and they're like, hey, I'm working on this project. I want to make sure it's historically accurate. Will you help? And I'm like, yes, I will design. I will offer artifacts however that works per situation, but I do consulting work to help people who want to bring historical accuracy into their preaching, their illustrations, their books, whatever it may be. I have a page on my website with the consulting information. You can contact me there for all of that. But I used to sell peg dolls. I've moved away from that because they were so time consuming, but I have historically accurate paper dolls, little figures you can print off, use with your kids. My daughter especially loves it when I read a passage of scripture and then she gets the little paper doll figures and she'll act out that
Mhm.
passage. And it's a really hands-on way to bring the Bible to life in an ethnically authentic, historically accurate way for kids. And so those paper dolls are a really easy way to go with kiddos. And it has them with historically accurate skin tones. Again, skin tones taken from archaeological artifacts, not just what I assume the ancient people looked like, but how did they portray themselves? And then the clothing that they would wear in that particular time period. Old Testament paper dolls are coming bit by bit. New Testament, I have the whole Gospels done. So I have every single figure you need for any story in the Gospels. I have that for you in the colors, the skin tones, the styles from archaeology, as close as I can tell from that time period. So that's kind of what I do. It's a little bit of all of it, but yeah. And talking through hermeneutics and Bible study tips and how do we understand the role of women in society and the church and how does God view women through scripture and how much does he love us, especially for those who are hurting, traumatized, neurodivergent, all of that is what we do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jessica, for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we have, I think our two-thirds of our audience is female, because of the nature of the stuff that we're talking about. It means the other third is male. So thanks for describing the Wilson women. Thanks for describing as well as you're able to, and as much as you've
Yeah,
read their theology, how they write, the things that they're worried about, how other people are pulled in, and then sort of kind of a better way forward. So thanks for coming on and talking with
my
us.
pleasure. Yeah.